Good afternoon. My name is Onno Roel. I'm the General Director of the Aga Khan Agency for Habitat. We have a fantastic panel today. I will introduce them one by one. We are going to have a discussion not about how to stop climate change. It's a great discussion to have as well. But unfortunately, as most of you know, climate change is already with us. Our discussion today will be about how we can live with climate change, how we can do well despite climate change, and how we can help the probably up to 1 billion people who are already under threat from climate change today do well. Many of you know that island nations and coastal communities are very vulnerable to climate change. I want to add to that it's very important to remember that all populations in mountains are equally vulnerable because they are at the leading edge of the risk that puts people at risk. But what we don't hear a lot about often is that it is not just people who are at risk, it's the infrastructure around them, it's their roads, their bridges, their land, their schools, their hospitals. And that's what today's discussion will be about. Pour commencer, on va demander à Son Excellence, le président de la République des Comores, de présenter son perspective, le perspective de son pays sur les risques et les conséquences du changement du climat qui a déjà eu lieu. Votre Excellence, s'il vous plaît.
Merci beaucoup. Mesdames et messieurs, honorables assistants, c'est un grand honneur, un privilège pour moi de m'adresser à ce panel dont je tiens à saluer la pertinence et le thème. Résister aux éléments, construire des infrastructures à l'ère du changement climatique. En effet, organisé dans le cadre de cette deuxième édition du prestigieux Forum de Paris pour la paix, ce panel est une heureuse opportunité de réfléchir sur la construction d'infrastructures résilientes aux risques climatiques. Tel est le défi qui se présente à nous face à la multiplication, à l'intensification des phénomènes liés au changement climatique. Aujourd'hui, aussi bien les zones rurales que les zones sociétés urbaines doivent s'adapter à des risques climatiques de plus en plus marqués. Le principe de résilience constitue donc un maillon essentiel pour penser cette transition en apportant dès la conception des infrastructures une souplesse, une agilité capable de résister et de s'adapter aux crises éventuelles sans se refuser à penser à l'avenir. Dans mon pays, l'Union des Comores, les conséquences catastrophiques du réchauffement se font déjà sentir. État insulaire, les risques de submersion des territoires, la baisse des récoltes, les inondations, la multiplication des épisodes cycloniques sont déjà une triste réalité. Le passage dévastateur du cyclone Kenneth aux Comores en avril dernier, avec ses graves conséquences à court et à moyen terme, notamment la destruction des infrastructures, en est une parfaite et terrible preuve. Ainsi, nous ne pouvons pas nous contenter d'énumérer les menaces. Les menaces sont là, nous devons proposer des solutions et en tant que gouvernants, agir. Pour cela, il est indispensable de penser d'abord, de tracer les pistes concrètes menant certainement à la réduction du demande des énergies des bâtiments et des transports, mais aussi et surtout à concevoir des territoires plus résilients pour mieux parer les conséquences du dérèglement du climat. Aussi, rendre les infrastructures résistantes et adaptables au choc climatique fait-il partie des priorités de mon gouvernement. Honorable Assistance, selon les études disponibles, 75% des infrastructures urbaines de 2050 restent à construire. L'opportunité existe alors d'intégrer les nouveaux principes dans la conception de l'infrastructure, tout comme l'adaptation des infrastructures sur le terrain entrepreneurial pour adapter les infrastructures et leur usage au changement climatique. Toutefois, compte tenu de l'ampleur de l'investissement nécessaire, l'action concertée au niveau international s'avère déterminante. C'est pourquoi nous saluons l'initiative lancée par l'Inde, ce pays frère et ami, et le Bureau des Nations Unies pour la réduction des risques du lancement de la condition pour les infrastructures résilientes aux catastrophes. Je saisis cette opportunité avant de terminer pour vous inviter à prendre part les 2 et 3 décembre prochains à la conférence des partenaires de développement des Comores qui vise entre autres à trouver les investissements nécessaires à la résiliation des objectifs de croissance accélérée et développement durable dans les pays, parmi lesquels la lutte contre les changements climatiques et leurs répercussions. Merci de votre écoute. Je vous en remercie.
Merci beaucoup, Votre Excellence. Je pense que that's an excellent segue to Kamal Kishore, who is the director of India's National Disaster Management Agency. India has really taken importance to this issue of resilient infrastructure. Can you share with us some perspective as to why this is so important for India? What does it mean, not just for the government, for the people of India?
Thank you, Ono. If you live in a cyclone-prone area anywhere in the world, the chances of you dying now as opposed to 30 years ago are much lower. But the chances of you losing your livelihood are 10 times higher. In the first week of May, we had a big cyclone on the coast of Odisha, on our eastern coast. We brought down the mortality by something like 95% compared to similar events 15 years ago. But in terms of losses, economic losses emanating from loss to infrastructure, enormous. Just in one sector, just in power sector, the losses in a handful of districts of coastal Odisha were something like $1.4 billion. And it is not just about the stock impact. It's not just about the money. Infrastructure is not about just cement and concrete and steel. It's about people. When the power systems fail for 3 weeks, then the telecom systems also do not work. When the telecom systems don't work, the cash machines do not work. When the cash machines do not work, people who need to get cash to invest in their small enterprises are not able to do that. The knock-on effect lasts for months. So the world can no longer be satisfied to just saving lives. We have to go beyond saving lives to saving livelihoods. And it is going to be much, much more challenging because past is no longer a good guide for the future. This year, I worked on disaster management for 25 years. For the first time, I saw 3 cyclones, 2 in the Arabian Sea, 1 in the Bay of Bengal at the same time. I've never seen this before. And there has been relentless stream of cyclones, one after the other. Geography of floods is changing. So how are we going to build infrastructure for the future? Because there is a fair bit of uncertainty for the local level manifestations of climate change. Do I design my stormwater drainage in urban areas for 30 centimeter rainfall in the month of July or 35 or 40? Cost implications of all the 3 are entirely different. But very huge amount of uncertainty. Just what can we do together to come up with solutions for managing this uncertainty? The third point I want to say is that, third and final point I want to say right now, is that no place can be left behind. If you live in some part of the world and you think that you're safer from climate, nobody should be under any illusion that, in a sense, everybody lives downstream. So you can build your shipping industry very resilient. But in the network, if one port fails, your system fails as well. Same is the case with airports. So we are all living in a globally interconnected system. These risks are very difficult to model. They require collaboration across small island developing countries, landlocked countries, developed countries, developing countries. It is a global problem. It's an enormous problem, and our ambition should match the scale of the problem.
So we've gotten better at having people survive disaster, but our infrastructure is getting more and more damaged. Even though disaster gets worse, people survive better. So it shows that we can actually solve problems if we focus on them. Laurence Tubiane, you're from the European Climate Federation, if I got that correct. I love the work that everybody who fights for climate change does. But I sometimes get the impression that most of it is about carbon emissions, how to change our behavior, maybe drive electric or not drive at all, take the train or stay at home, eat different foods, which is all great. I don't hear as much about the threats that Mr. Kishore and His Excellency the President talk about. Maybe that's an unfair perspective, but can you give the perspective how in the COP process and otherwise this aspect is coming through?
Um, of course, it has been an evolution. And when you look at how adaptation was, in a way, involved into the global climate talks, it was probably 5 years ago, even, or 10 years ago, it was certainly something about finance, how you transfer finance, how adaptation is about, in a way, solidarity elements between developing countries and developed ones. And there was no real serious thinking about the impacts, but because probably the idea was that impacts were for the future, they were not for now. It was like, yes, it will happen for the next generation, not for now. And now, of course, because, well, we haven't really delivered on mitigation seriously, that's why we still have to work very, very importantly into really reducing greenhouse gases. At the same time, we are now witnessing that the impacts are for now. And the cost of the impacts, it was just, of course, so obvious what you said. I don't need to deploy more arguments that now the cost is really, really, really high. To the point that I think 2 years ago, the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, created a window, a facility, not for something which was really the macroeconomic problem of the extreme events and the impact of the economies. So I think the reason was adaptation was not really at the center of the discussion was because you were thinking it's for the future. Now is no more the case, and I can tell that negotiating the Paris Agreement, there was two elements that was finally driving the agreement at the end. One was we have to try to limit temperature much below 2 degrees C, because if not, the adaptation cost would be too high for many, many countries, and that's why came up the idea we have to limit to 1.5 degrees the global warming process. And second, the idea that we need now to have adaptation plans, seriously. And that, I think, some countries, and many, many countries, are looking at it seriously now. The problem is the speed and in a way, the shared understanding of, as you said, a lot of uncertainty, how, in a way, companies and cities and people can look at the future where finally all the data of the past is not valuable enough. It's not really, doesn't tell you a lot what will happen. And so we need a lot more understanding and research to understand how this uncertainty can deploy, and how we respond to it. And again, it's not about just only how you rebuild bridge and roads. It's about how you ecosystem are really ruined by the climate impacts, and you are losing the mangroves and the fish population and of course the species and the biodiversity, and this at turn puts you in a really difficult situation, or your yields are really going down, and because then you really, the weather and the combination with, of course, all these elements make you unable to continue maintaining the livelihood. So I think it's very interesting to understand that infrastructure is about livelihoods. And then you can even extend the resilience to the social fabric. How you can imagine societies that will resist about, you were mentioning this simultaneity of cyclones. Imagine you do that every year. Can you reconstitute your capital? Probably not really. Can you maintain your social fabric, your family relation, when you have to cope so much, and whereas building this human capital has taken so long? So there is in a way, civilizational risk we are facing because of the disruption that climate change is impacting. And when I listen people talking about the cost of climate action, I'm just furious about that. You are still economies that say, oh, we may delay action because it will cost less in the future, where the cost of the impacts are enormous now. We are losing points of GDP already. It's not in the future. So I think that's why I think data observation, really now counting on how much money we are spending and how much disruption we are bringing to society, is something now we have to factor in. And that's why adaptation was not really taken seriously, because people, government and economic actors were not thinking really on the real cost, the social cost, of course the capital cost, and of course all what is disrupting the societies in the long term. And that's why I think you totally described that process.
Thank you. That's a really important perspective. Climate change adaptation is not in the future, it's actually today. Yet I spent 20 years at the World Bank before my current job, and I remember planning projects as little as 4 years ago, and we just built them to code or to what in Washington we used to call best practice. I don't remember anybody ever saying, but you know, there's going to be a cyclone every month, or a glacial lake outburst flood every year in the Himalayas. I don't remember that kind of discussion. Koen Doens, you're the Director General for Cooperation of another very large development organization, the European Commission. Have you guys caught up with the World Bank, or maybe even sped by? And are you looking at these things? How do you see this challenge? Because the financial consequences are enormous. The benefits, of course, of building the right way are equally very important. How does that work in practice?
Well, thanks, and congratulations for pronouncing my first name correctly. You're Dutch, I know that. Well, I mean, you've all listened to the three previous speakers, so I think it's the reply to your question is obvious, that yes, we are, for sure. Because if we were not, then all the investment we are making together with our partners in the framework of international cooperation and development would basically be investments lost. Now, as you've indicated yourself, this is not easy to do. I think one of the big advantages of precisely the Paris Agreement is that it has mobilized our minds, it has focused our attention, not just on mitigation, but also on, because we will never mitigate fast enough, also on the need to look more seriously at adaptation. And I think for us, I see what we are doing, four main strands of action. The first is the absolute need for evidence-based policies, and there we really have work to do. We've created a disaster resilience knowledge hub, where we put some of the brain power of the European Union behind it with the Joint Research Center, trying to really understand what is happening, what lessons can we draw, and what is going to happen in the future, and what do we need to prepare ourselves for. This knowledge hub, for instance, is providing input, steer, counsel to the Global Covenant of Mayors, which is a key actor when it comes to resilience. The second strand of action we're following is about subsequently working with partners, with the United Nations, on creating for different countries risk profiles, which is fundamental. You've said it yourself, not all countries are facing in the same manner the impact of such disasters. And so fine-tuning it country by country and even at sub-country level to understand better how can we develop response strategies that are fit for purpose. That's the second line of action where we invest in. And I think it's important as a development actor to invest in that as well. The third layer is then where it gets real. It's about investing in resilient infrastructure. And obviously, as we all know, the first attention always goes to what is the most obvious, which is roads. But we look far beyond roads, because it's not just about roads. It is about energy. It is about schools. It is about water and sanitation. It is about all these things that are related fundamentally to livelihood. And we can do that. I mean, if you look at how Japan, because of its, let's say, exposure to earthquakes, has been able to develop infrastructure that is more resistant than any other place in the world to earthquakes. Well, we should apply the same approach across the board to any form of infrastructure that is situated in countries, and there are plenty of them, that can be affected by the impacts of climate change. And that brings me to a final point, which is that even if we brace ourselves, even if we mobilize massively to do so, there will always still be a large part of the population that will be vulnerable, that will be hit by the impact. And that's where the whole insurance business is so important. And that's for us, our fourth strand of action is to see how we can work with the private sector, and then notably with the insurers, using a bit of our development money to also generate impact so that the insurers can reach parts of the population that normally, to a certain extent, would be out of reach. But I'm not going to preempt what the next speaker will say.
Well, that's a total setup for going to Antoine Denois. But before you do, you know, I grew up in the Netherlands, and when I was young, we were building the Delta Works, which were built to defend the country against the effects of what in 1953 was a once-in-a-thousand-year flood. And the Delta Works were nicely built to be able to resist a once-in-a-2,000-year flood, if I'm not mistaken. We learned that in school. I never paid attention, but it was something like that. And they're there. I think it's now a once-in-a-50-year flood they defend against. This is not a developing country problem. And the Netherlands is actually one of the best defended countries still, because at least they built the Delta Works. Risk is changing. How do you deal with that? As an insurance company, can you reach other people when the risk is getting worse? It sounds like difficult to me. Et vous allez parler en français, donc excusez-moi.
Pour le respect des équilibres, vous avez le droit à écouter mon français et pas mon anglais. Merci beaucoup pour la question. Je pense qu'en tant qu'assureur, on approche le sujet climatique avec beaucoup d'humilité. Pourquoi ? Parce que depuis des années, en tant qu'assureur, et je ne parle pas forcément d'AXA, mais collectivement, on n'a pas réussi à réduire ce qu'on appelle le protection gap, c'est-à-dire l'écart entre la protection des individus, des entreprises et des gouvernements en tant qu'assurance et la taille des risques climatiques. Et ça, c'est vrai de tous les pays. Et c'est d'autant plus difficile et d'autant plus challengeant maintenant qu'avec dans un contexte de réchauffement climatique, ce protection gap va avoir tendance à s'agrandir. Et donc la vraie prise de conscience assez récente des assureurs, c'est de dire si on veut essayer d'apporter notre pierre à l'édifice, il faut qu'on le fasse différemment, avec des produits différents. Et donc, je ne sais pas si vous connaissez ce produit qu'on dit le produit paramétrique, mais les produits d'assurance paramétrique sont une façon pour les assureurs de faire différemment et de protéger avec des produits différents. Donc en quelques mots, pour les béotiens, un produit d'assurance paramétrique, c'est un produit complètement automatique dans son exécution. Donc il faut imaginer que l'indemnité va au client sur la base de l'évolution d'indices météo et climatiques. La magnitude, la radiation, la vitesse du vent. À partir du moment où on crée un seuil, on est capable, en tant qu'assureur, sans passer par une expertise de longue durée sur le terrain, de donner l'argent le plus vite possible à la communauté et à l'individu. Et ce type de produit, pour nous, c'est un levier majeur dans le challenge climatique de façon à réduire ce protection gap. Je vais vous donner 2 illustrations. Je sais que les minutes sont comptées. Le premier, c'est il y a une dizaine à peu près dans le monde de gouvernements qui ont commencé à mettre en place ce qu'on appelle des grands pools de réassurance paramétriques, c'est-à-dire avec du capital d'assureurs, ils protègent leurs infrastructures et leur population, notamment les agriculteurs dont vous parliez. Et là, le principe est simple. S'il y a un typhon qui passe à telle distance d'un épicentre ou d'une infrastructure, il y a un paiement automatique au bout de quelques heures ou de quelques jours qui est apporté par la place et par les réassureurs de la place. Ça, c'est vraiment une illustration très concrète de ce que peut apporter l'assureur différemment des années précédentes. Et je citais une dizaine de pools. Le plus fameux est celui des Philippines, malheureusement impacté ces derniers temps par de nombreux tremblements de terre. Eh bien, à chaque tremblement de terre, la place se mobilise pour payer le plus rapidement possible. Un autre exemple d'illustration de ce qu'on peut faire avec le paramétrique, à partir du moment où on ne dépend plus d'un expert physique, eh bien, en fait, on peut devenir très créatif sur la façon dont on protège nos clients. Par exemple, il y a beaucoup de banques qui sont frileuses à prêter à des dispositifs d'énergie renouvelable parce qu'il y a beaucoup de volatilité du vent, du rainfall, de la précipitation. Et pour l'hydro, le solaire ou l'éolien, eh bien, il y a une frilosité des investisseurs à accorder des crédits à des nouveaux projets. Le paramétrique est une façon de combiner le crédit et l'assurance de façon simple, de manière à permettre à ces projets de voir naissance et de se développer. On travaille beaucoup avec des banques en leur disant on va protéger votre portefeuille de crédit pour faire en sorte que vous continuez à financer des fermes éoliennes ou du solaire ou des usines ou des hydros ou des plantations d'hydro de manière à couvrir le risque de volatilité météo, le solaire, les chutes de pluie, etc. Donc c'est 2 illustrations très simples qui montrent, mais avec beaucoup d'humilité parce qu'on est encore tout au début de l'histoire, qu'on part d'un constat globalement d'échec dans la protection des populations sur le climat. On passe par une remise en cause de la place qui est de dire nos produits ne sont pas adaptés. Et via le paramétrique, mais il y a également d'autres produits, on va essayer de revenir aux côtés des institutions, notamment internationales, aux côtés des gouvernements, de façon à faire différemment pour accompagner et mieux accompagner les populations, leurs infrastructures dans un contexte de changement climatique.
Ça, c'est super intéressant. Merci de partager ça. Je trouve surtout l'idée d'un assureur qui paye de façon automatique très attrayant. Je viendrai chez vous bientôt. mais sérieusement, de travailler ce problème avec de l'imagination, de l'innovation, je pense que c'est très bien. I wanted to come to some of the more difficult problems, because we all agree that this is a big problem, clearly. So that's nice. You all know now that we agree that this is a big problem. And it sounds like we have all the solutions, but something tells me we might not. So let's just do a round of little questions like that. So Koen, in a good Dutch-Flemish interaction, you said we're doing this, it's great, you have a knowledge bank, it's wonderful, you're looking at this. In my experience, when you do that, and at some point somebody has to say, what's the budget for my investment, they start trading down the budget. And sometimes they do that by changing the specs. And things that are in the future don't always get financed. Is that a problem?
No, it isn't. And it isn't for a very simple reason, which is that now, but even more so in the future, this will be at the heart of what we want to do. I think that when you've listened to most of our European leaders lately, the Paris Agreement is a top reference for our, let's say, external action foreign policy. If you look at the political guidelines, which the president-elect of the European Commission, President von der Leyen, has presented to the European Parliament, and which is the basis of our future work, it has at the heart of that political program for the next 5 years the Green Deal. The Green Deal, which will shape not just the focus of what Europe will do within its own borders, but will fundamentally shape as well what we will do beyond our borders. And so for us, in my line of business, the New Deal, the new Green Deal, and what it means in terms of putting climate change, both adaptation and mitigation, at the heart of our partnerships with the countries across the globe, that is no longer a question or something that I will need to fight for. It is a given. And so the year ahead, when we start preparing our next budgetary cycle, we will have a new, hopefully sizable budget to implement as of 2021. Next year, we will spend talking to our partner governments to fix the priorities which we will pursue with them over the next 7 years. And one of the real benchmarks of that will be precisely climate change in its adaptation and mitigation angle. So I'm not too much afraid that at the end of the day, we will not focus our financial means on that, because that's not just where the needs are, it's also where the politics are.
Well, that's very encouraging to hear, and definitely President von der Leyen spoke about it quite convincingly this morning. I still, you know, in the brief for this session, it is said 50% of the infrastructure that needs to be there in 2050 is yet to be built. So that means 50% is already there. Now, what really scares me is that I personally don't think all that infrastructure is good enough to resist the risk as it is evolving. I'm a bit afraid. We saw a bridge in Italy collapse a few years ago. Don't want to single out Italy. I think it could have happened in any country, to be honest. We have a huge stock of infrastructure that was built with a different risk profile in mind. And so I just want to, the commitment is great, the challenge is possibly even greater. So you want to come in on that?
Yeah, because again, that's a big move. I think you have said that very nicely, but again, maybe 8 months ago or 1 year ago, it was not there. We could not say that all the reference could be centrally, that the climate change, both mitigation and adaptation, would be as a central piece. My foundation was fighting to have more than 25% of the MFF for climate action. Now it's no more the question, it's a centerpiece. It's absolutely a shift. And so, again, the past is the past. The stock of capital and organization is there. But the fact that this is a total shift on the way we reconsider economic development, support, etc., I think I would like really to dwell on that, because again, 8 months ago, 9 months ago, before the European election, that was not there. And I really want to recognize that.
Well, that's great, because we're clearly not early with this intervention, but at least we're trying. And just an optimistic note, Kamal shared with us, I'll come to you, that we got 95% less chance of dying in a cyclone when you're in India because of a very focused effort of actually improving that risk. And, you know, that means influencing humans who need to evacuate during an emergency. It's not an easy thing to do. So I'm kind of thinking if we focus on infrastructure, we might be able to have very good results, because it may not all be expensive. It might just be a different way of thinking. So could you elaborate a bit on what the government of India is trying to do, especially also in the international arena, to not just get attention, but action for this problem?
Yeah, let me just first
Use your mic.
Let me just first talk a little bit about the issue of financing. I think the financing discussion, especially in countries where the infrastructure deficit is huge, has to go beyond risk financing to talk about financing in a way that it nudges the whole infrastructure development towards resilience. We have to say that, you know, if it's not always more infrastructure which is better, but it's more resilient infrastructure that is better. And we have to begin to talk about costs in terms of life cycle costs and human costs. You know, when there is a bridge which basically gets demolished halfway or degraded, it affects livelihoods for months. And who is going to cost that and take that into account? So looking at all of this, basically, you know, in the coalition work that we're trying to do with the other countries, there are 4 things that we need to look at. One is we have to have a new paradigm of looking at risk, where we're not just looking at just the asset level risk, but also looking at systems risk. Looking at not just the risk to infrastructure, but risk from infrastructure. There are numerous examples: beautiful road, resilient to floods and cyclones, but, you know, causing flooding downstream. You know, so everybody is devastated. You have a beautiful road, but nobody's walking on that road. So I think that the whole new paradigm of risk. The second is standards. You know, you talked about standards getting out of date in, you know, 4 years. What are we going to do with standards in the face of climate change? So standards, regulation, including regulating professions involved in infrastructure. The third is role of finance, I talked about. And finally, we have to do a much better job of recovery from disasters in infrastructure sectors. You know, there has to be a much better predictable mechanism at the local government level to quickly recover and build back better. We've been paying lip service to build back better. We really have to make that reality. And how do you put in place mechanisms in place before, so that you are able to build back with the information of how the climate is unfolding, and not just building back the way it was?
So you know, we had a joke in the disaster management team of the World Bank that BBB, Build Back Better, actually meant barely build back, because and we really need to change this philosophy. And I really commend you and the government of India. We've worked together on this in trying to get a different perspective. Monsieur le Président, je voudrais revenir chez vous, parce que votre pays, comme on a partagé, c'est des îles, il y a la côte, il y a même la montagne, il y a beaucoup de risques. Vous espérez quoi à votre place en tant que responsable pour ce pays? J'aurais peur. Vous espérez quoi de toute cette discussion de fonds, de plans, de connaissances?
Merci bien. Vous savez, vous avez parfaitement raison. À un moment donné, nous, les pays, petits États insulaires, plus exposés, mais quand même, on s'est réconforté parce que tout le monde s'est rendu compte que ce n'est pas seulement les pays insulaires qui sont concernés. Ce problème de catastrophe concerne tout le monde, parce qu'on vient de parler tout à l'heure, les pays qui sont exposés au tremblement de terre. Bon, c'est des données. Donc ça veut dire que maintenant, tout le monde en est concerné. Effectivement, l'accord de Paris nous a démontré, et très sincèrement, tout le monde y a pris part et tout le monde s'est engagé. Mais en ce qui concerne le Comore, effectivement, donc nous sommes un pays à 4 îles, insulaire entre les îles aussi. Et je dois vous dire qu'il n'y a pas un village, une ville qui est à plus de 20 km de la mer. Le plus loin, il est à 20 km. Donc ça veut dire que vous avez la mer qui monte et vous avez les montagnes qui descendent. Donc c'est vrai, on est plus exposé. Donc nous maintenant, il faut gérer, hein, parce qu'on se rend compte qu'on dit changement de climat. Bon, il y en a qui ont tout fait pour se développer et nous, on en consomme les conséquences. Bon, mais ce n'est pas un problème. Donc il va falloir y aller, puisque fort heureusement, on n'a pas été demandé où est-ce que vous voulez qu'on vous viviez. On est là, donc on doit affronter les problèmes. Donc nous, on a pris les mesures, mais mes collègues ont prononcé des mots intéressants. Quand on parlait des données, moi, j'ai traduit ça par la prévention. Donc il faut prévoir, il faut prévenir. Et la guérison. Donc nous, on doit prévenir, et les assureurs, hein, ils vont venir guérir. Hein. Merci beaucoup. Donc on va prévenir, les banques vont nous accompagner dans ces prévisions. Et c'est pourquoi les données, on doit les avoir. Ça veut dire la formation des jeunes. Ça veut dire le savoir. Il va falloir un investissement très sincère dans ce côté-là, parce qu'effectivement, il y a des données qu'il faut avoir pour pouvoir prévenir. Et c'est pour ça, dans notre pays, nous avons pris comme priorité l'éducation et la santé, effectivement, pour pouvoir aller de l'avant. Donc ce phénomène-là, on le vit, puisque le changement climatique, comme vous dites maintenant, nous, avant, quand on était jeunes, comme vous venez de le dire, hein, donc on se disait que telle période, il y avait ça ceci, cascasique aussi, et maintenant, c'est toute l'année. Hein, c'est toute l'année. Avant, on s'attendait que dans tel mois, il y a de la pluie qui va tomber, il y a des torrents qui vont descendre. Et maintenant, ça change tout. Et c'est pourquoi maintenant, le phénomène, il est pluriel, pluriannuel, il est exposé à tout le monde. En tout cas, on remercie beaucoup ceux qui sont engagés, hein, la COP24, la COP22 de Paris, la COP de Paris. Et aussi hein, l'Inde hein, qui nous a réunis à un sommet à New Delhi pour essayer d'étudier ces problèmes climatologiques et qui s'est engagé pour ça. On le remercie beaucoup. En tout cas, on est sur le chantier et on attend votre aide pour aller de l'avant. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup, Excellence. So it's very important when you're so much at risk. My agency, the Aga Khan Agency for Habitat, is not my agency, it's the agency of the Aga Khan and the communities we work with. We work with high mountain communities in the Himalayas. And first we thought we organize the community so that they can respond. Then we thought we'll map the risk and do early warning systems. Now we understand that the real issue is when you understand the risk, you plan for where and how the community should build so that you actually not more expensively, but more smartly build a community for the future. And that is like a snapshot of what we need in climate change adaptation at the cutting edge of climate change in the high mountains. Now, AXA is not just an insurer, it's also an investor. So but you wanted to say something else, why don't you say that? But come back to the investment perspective also.
Ce qui était intéressant, c'était de dire que nous, la mue qu'on fait aussi dans l'assurance, c'est que toutes les données qui nous ont permis de prédire le risque, on considère maintenant que c'est du bien public. Et donc de plus en plus, les risques assessment, inondations, earthquake, on les met à disposition de nos clients pour les mettre au service de la prévention. Et je trouve que c'est un bon exemple de mue d'un acteur privé qui prend conscience de son cœur business. Il y a quelque chose qui relève aussi du bien commun et qui peut servir à la prévention. Sur l'investissement, oui, donc AXA, en effet, comme on collecte beaucoup de primes et beaucoup d'épargne de nos clients, on a aussi une responsabilité d'investisseur. Et là, je pense que c'est, je vais peut-être être un peu provoquant, mais c'est la marche la plus facile pour nous. C'est d'une façon se poser la question de réorienter notre investissement vers ces projets qui ont du sens par rapport à l'adaptation. Et donc AXA a lancé son 3e fonds, qu'on appelle Impact Fund, dont la couleur, la caractéristique spécifique est d'être résolument tourné vers des projets qui ont du sens indépendamment de la seule variable financière et donc qui sont jugés à l'aune d'autres critères que des critères financiers. Par exemple, le nombre de vaccins, le nombre de personnes vaccinées dans certaines régions pour certains projets. Et donc on s'oriente de plus en plus vers ce type de fonds, on va dire, résolument orientés vers des actions concrètes. Et surtout, et j'insiste, parce que c'est le nerf de la guerre, assessé, évalué par l'investisseur, nous en l'occurrence, avec des KPI qui ne sont pas simplement des KPI financiers, mais qui peuvent être des KPI de vie protégée, d'infrastructures sauvegardées, et en tout cas de capacité à mieux s'adapter au réchauffement climatique.
Merci beaucoup. Laurence, when I was trying to access climate finance some time ago, I was told, don't come with mitigation, there's plenty of projects, do adaptation, because we can't find a single good project to finance. Now we're sitting here, we've seen the light, right? We say it's very important, we need to work on this, a lot of commitments from Europe, from India, it's all great. Do we actually have the projects and the investments for this? Do you have a sense of that? And I might ask Koen also to comment on that aspect.
Probably, of course, not enough, or at least when you look at where the financial community is investing its money. I think still most of it is invested in fossil fuel. So there is something like a disconnection between what we witness, the risk we are facing, and where the money is invested. So in a way, and then when you talk to asset managers, for example, they would tell you, look, we would like to invest in something different, but we don't have the project. So I don't think it's totally fair, to be frank. One is that because they are hedging their risk and they are thinking that finally this still, of course, I'm not speaking about AXA, but many, many others that are still not thinking that they should invest in somewhere else. What is true is that, again, adaptation has been thought as a cost. Like, in a way, mitigation was perceived as a cost before, and it's now evolving. You see now business opportunities, and of course, in a way, that it's a good investment for the future. But we are probably in the middle of the river for adaptation. In a number of cases, mitigation and adaptation projects are the same ones. It's good to have resilient infrastructure in power and to have clean power, and maybe sometimes decentralized clean power is more resilient than to have only one centralized grid, just because uncertainty is just about you don't know exactly what will happen. It's the same for agriculture. Most of the agricultural projects could be on both sides, able that agriculture can provide solution for carbon capture as well as maintaining fertility and providing for the resilience. So I think we have to have an intellectual shift. We have had adaptation was a cost, mitigation was something we should do in the future because we will have the technology. And we have really a knowledge revolution to bring. I am struck by the fact that all what we have been listening to is the cost is there and it's super high. And when you discuss with most governments, well, it's sort of a cognitive dissonance. Yes, it's a big problem, but we have so many things to really be careful about. And so there is really not the understanding that it's just now and it's absolutely big. That's why countries have to testify that it is now macro-critical. It's about debt. It's about the global investment of a country. And that will probably change the philosophy of all the financial community and the way to respond to them. I'm sure that there is plenty of good adaptation projects and that makes sense of the future as business opportunities. But I think there is a cognitive dissonance because people think that it's still safer to invest in the activities of, I would say, the 19th century.
Yes, or some would say the 20th century, but that's okay. Yeah. Koen, you wanted to come in on that before I ask Kamal to wrap up?
Yes, because I fully agree, obviously, that it's a bit like squaring the circle. The money will go there where the projects are, and the projects will only emerge if there is money for it. So somehow you need to devise a policy framework that pushes it in the right direction. I think that definitely when it comes to mitigation, we're massively moving in the right direction. The green economy is not just seen as something we need to do to save the planet. That's where the market is. And if you look at how asset managers, investment banks are looking for opportunities, it's obviously that this is a market that is not just being created, it is already there. And one of the key parts, by the way, of von der Leyen's Green Deal within the EU is precisely to push that further. But the same is true internationally. The EU is working, by the way, with India, with a number of other international partners, including China, on a taxonomy for green finance. Because, of course, if you want to bring the big money there, you need to make sure that there are internationally established and recognized criteria for what green finance is and what it isn't. You can't just do that in a kind of a gray zone. So that work is ongoing and it is fundamental because it's an essential let's say, step, an essential trigger to move important volumes of private investment there. I think we're less where we should be when it comes to adaptation, and I think that it is one of the things we need to work on. Is how can we push, let's say, the boundaries a bit further to bring it from mitigation also to adaptation and build precisely that. I know that the coalition is looking into these aspects as well. It's about standard setting, it's about evidence-based, it's about knowledge sharing, and it is about the financial aspects of it.
So India is impatient on adaptation, and Kamal, since the audience is also impatient, maybe to ask us one or two questions before we wrap up in 30 seconds. What's CDRI?
Well, the CDRI is something which will complement the mitigation efforts, advance the adaptation agenda for resilient infrastructure through knowledge sharing and capacity development where it needed. It is something which is trying to bring together a variety of players, not just governments, but also the private sector, the academic institutions, and so on. I just want to make one last comment. I think the perils of compartmentalizing mitigation and adaptation can be illustrated by a flood that happened more than a year ago in India. So we have this beautiful new airport in Kochi, which took pride in the fact that it was 100% on renewables. And guess what? When the floods happened, all the solar panels were underwater. And 15 days of disruption, the revenue lost would have been enough to build it better to withstand the floods. So it's really, I mean, so this effort to work on CDRI is really, you know, we are doing some work on Solar Alliance, as Excellency pointed out, and this CDRI will work on adaptation, and it will be our small contribution to working on the entire spectrum of things.
Thank you very much for that.